Open up government. Open the government. Let's talk.
We are all one. We have to stop looking at each other as skin colors.
Sloth socks is one of those things that Sally sells by the seashore.
The Supreme Court ruled 5-4 to allow President Trump's ban on transgender military service to take effect, while lower courts decide whether it's constitutional. The court also decided not to act on the government's challenge to the DACA program, but did agree to hear its first Second Amendment case since 2010, a challenge to a New York City law that stops people licensed to keep guns in their homes from taking them outside the city.
Agents were working cases yesterday, they're working cases today, and they will be working cases tomorrow.
The FBI Agents Association is warning the Trump administration that the government shutdown is hindering investigations. Active and former agents gave anonymous accounts of budgets so slim they have no translators in the office, can't pay for gas, and can't refill phone cards to contact confidential sources. Public school teachers in Los Angeles have reached a deal to end their strike. The agreement in the country's second-largest school district still needs to be ratified and details aren't public, but the superintendent says it means better salaries for teachers, smaller classes, and more nurses, librarians, and counselors in schools. Super Bowl audiences watching the main event, the commercials, will see the Backstreet Boys and Chance the Rapper repping Flamin' Hot Nacho-flavored Doritos and Michael Bublé pushing a sparkling water brand. But they won't see an ad calling for the legalization of medical marijuana. The company that pitched that, Acreage Holdings, which has former House Speaker John Boehner on its board, pitched the ad to CBS. But the game's broadcaster says its standards don't allow ads for weed.
Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell actually showed up today and announced a deal. One with Senator Chuck Schumer to vote on 2 bills that would end the shutdown. Except neither of those bills will pass.
First, the Senate will vote on the president's proposal, and then will vote on an amendment that is identical to the underlying bill.
What are these 2 bills? One of them would simply fund the shuttered parts of the government through February 8th, bringing workers back while Congress and Trump debate the wall. The House already passed this. The Senate won't. The other bill is the compromise that Trump offered this weekend, funding for a border wall in exchange for temporary relief for DACA recipients and immigrants with temporary protected status. Democrats say it's a non-starter. So why is McConnell doing this? As the shutdown gets worse, McConnell needs to seem like he's doing something. The move is kind of a capitulation to Democrats and suggests the pressure on Republicans is much more significant than the pressure on Dems. Part of the problem for Republicans is that Democrats nationwide have been holding the line on the shutdown. Even those in swing districts, where you'd think pressure from Republican voters would make them more open to compromise with Trump. Like in Virginia's 10th district, which has been in Republican hands for more than 2 decades. Now it's represented by Democrat Jennifer Wexton. And when I spoke with her on Monday at an MLK Day parade, she wasn't shy about opposing Trump's wall.
I think border security is something we've been looking for years, and that's something that we support. But a concrete wall across the entire southern border of the United States is not the answer.
Today, I spoke to Illinois Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, another newly elected swing district Democrat.
Additional money for border security measures that exceed even their initial request. And so the spending packages that we've been supporting fund smart border security. Technologies that will scan cars for drugs at the border, drones, things like additional personnel, which are critically important at these ports of entry.
Democrats also had a unified message on the carrot that Trump is dangling, temporary protection for DACA recipients. They said it doesn't go far enough.
It doesn't contain any kind of certainty for DACA recipients. It doesn't contain any path to citizenship or permanency. It doesn't contain the same that for TPS recipients. So, there's a lot missing from it.
I think that it was not a strong good faith offer, one. And then number two, I'm not interested in a compromise that trades dreamers like they are baseball cards.
It's especially significant that swing district Democrats, who have the most to lose by alienating Trump voters, are holding the line. That goes to show how much of an upper hand Democrats seem to believe they have in this fight. And they're boosted by two things: the fact that Donald Trump himself said he'd take full responsibility for the shutdown, and multiple polls showing Americans blame him. So there's little internal pressure on Pelosi to budge on the shutdown. And Trump's base is also putting lots of pressure on him not to budge either. But the vote Thursday will put senators in both parties on the record on how they feel about the wall and funding the government, which will make it tougher for them to hide from the TSA officers, air traffic controllers, FBI agents, and other federal workers who are going to miss their second paycheck this Friday as the shutdown drags on.
Two years ago this weekend, the first Women's March made a powerful statement about what the resistance could be. 4.5 million people showed up at marches around the country, more than 400,000 of them in New York. Last year, though, only about 2.5 million Americans marched, and attendance in New York dropped by half. The third anniversary events on Saturday also saw lower turnout. Some of the decline in participation is just human nature. It didn't help that temperatures in the Northeast were some of the coldest of the season. But organizers had a bigger problem to deal with, one with implications far beyond the march itself.
Can I ask for help? I have something hanging on my top eyelash in my eye. Can you see anything?
Katherine Siemionko worked in change management at Goldman Sachs till the 2016 election. Then she started organizing the New York Women's March on Facebook and eventually quit her job to run a nonprofit she created, the Women's March Alliance.
Thank you. All right, hello. I'm a little short there. Let me move that down. On Saturday, January 19th, Women's March Alliance will again host the third and only Women's March on New York City. We'll have female drum bands, female acrobats, women standing on women's shoulders, which can be just so beautiful.
This year, Katherine's not just struggling to figure out the logistics of a march. She's fighting a rival women's event for attendees.
So it's been a lot of confusion, and it's a bit unfortunate.
Both events claim to be the official event.
People have been coming to you saying, okay, I'm really confused. Which march should I go to?
So I think you're confusing our group with Women's March, Inc. We are Women's March Alliance.
But this is not a catfight over turf. It's a preview of a fight that will consume progressive politics in 2020.
I think our diversity here, and I think our inclusion of the Jewish community speaks for itself.
God bless you. Go in peace. The rival event is hosted by Women's March, Inc., which runs the DC March. Of the nearly 350 independent marches nationwide, it's the biggest and most famous. In December, the Jewish magazine Tablet published allegations that leaders of Women's March, Inc. had made anti-Semitic comments. One had publicly praised Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the Nation of Islam, who's also an anti-Semite. Katherine's Women's March Alliance denounced anti-Semitism and made it very clear it's different from Women's March, Inc. But that's not why there are two events. The Farrakhan controversy pushed into public view a broader debate about intersectionality, the idea that there isn't a universal experience of being a woman, but that oppression based on race and gender and class interact to affect women differently. Historically, the women's movement has ignored women of color. And the only way to fix this, Women's March, Inc. argues, is to put women of color in charge.
We do know that white women deal with oppression, but we also know that they are part of upholding systems of oppression against people of color. And therefore, we need to make sure that those people who are most impacted are first.
There's this big debate right now over whether white feminists in particular haven't done enough work to help women of color achieve equal status.
I see that as a cop-out. The moment you say you're white, therefore you are racist. I can't say you're black, therefore you're, Latino, therefore. We are all one. We have to stop looking at each other as skin colors.
I think some would argue that if you don't talk about race, you don't talk about how some people are particularly targeted by their race. If you don't talk about African Americans being targeted by police, then there's no way to fix that.
There's a fine line between being racist and perpetuating stereotypes that are damaging to a race and talking about a legitimate issue. And I think we just need to be careful how we're walking along that line.
Keys, wallet, phone. Do I have my keys? I have keys, yeah. I have everything I need. Okay. We're gonna be successful. It's gonna be great.
In a way, Katherine offers another kind of representation. She's a conservative Christian from Tampa. Her family voted for Trump. The Me Too movement made her think about how misogyny had affected her personally.
My mother, when Me Too started, she said, those are just a bunch of sluts that have regret.
Wow.
I was
what did you say?
Wow. They put themselves out there. I was like, Mom, so when I was raped, that was my fault? Well, I don't think you were really raped. I think you made that up. I mean, it's really...
Really?
Woo, I just got emotional. Oh, my God.
I'm sorry.
Blah. It's hard. It's hard. It's really hard. Because we as women, we don't want to open our eyes to what's happening sometimes because it's overwhelming.
Katherine thinks all women should work together to force change.
All right, let's go.
The problems she points to are ones that have affected her.
Sorry.
Equal pay and sexual violence.
Welcome to the 3rd Women's March Dry Run. Ah!
Intersectionality argues that her view as a white woman means that she doesn't see the problems that other women face. Katherine doesn't buy that.
It's overly politically correct. Your speech is inhibited by this concept that any word you say may offend somebody. If we're going to continue to nitpick and nitpick and nitpick and nitpick, we will never advance as a society. The left has to stop eating itself.
And so do you think these debates within the women's movement is just natural for any political movement?
Yeah, absolutely. Historically, when men are running the movement, civil rights movement is a great example, people don't look at it as infighting. When women are doing it, we have this stereotype, see, there's infighting. No, we just have different leaders. That's okay. You can have, this is a major movement.
Come out and stand for Jewish communities, stand against anti-Semitism, because I'm going to be there standing against it for you.
Sometimes it's clear Katherine isn't fluent in the language of the activist left. But we talked about intersectionality with a member of Katherine's board at an event to reach out to the Jewish community.
Have you had conversations with your feminist friends who are white where you're like, you don't understand, it's like sexism affects me differently as a biracial woman?
So this is interesting. It's opening Pandora's box, but I think part of the issue is privilege. And I think that's even what's happened between people of Jewish faith and African American or women of color. Sometimes I think people of Jewish faith put themselves in the same boat of people with color, and people of color don't see it that way.
High five to you, woman power. Yeah.
When we talked to marchers, most were aware of the debate over intersectionality, but it didn't dampen their enthusiasm to march in freezing weather.
I think we're all getting woke, is the term.
Did you ever feel like there was way more to these issues than you had realized, and then like you didn't want to?
These issues are deep. I mean, I have a very narrow, shallow understanding of a lot of these women's issues. We have 200,000 marchers! 200,000!
Katherine doesn't think she'll do the march next year, or at least not this March. Instead, she hopes to align the event with International Women's Day. It'll be warmer and less political.
It just brings everything down a notch. So it says, look, like you're walking for breast cancer, you're walking for women's rights, and people can get on board with that. I think right now it's like very tied to Trump. We want to break that tie.
Given all the controversy, I might have expected you to say like, oh, we're going to focus more on pulling in women of color, but actually you're going to focus more on getting women in the heartland.
Well, okay, so it's not just women, it's not just women of color. We need all women, period. We have to stand together as American women.
Flavored Juul pods are disappearing from vape store shelves across the country. A quick Twitter search for mango pods reveals people are struggling to find their fix. It's as if the citizens of Vape Nation have had their passports to flavor country revoked. This is all because Juul is actually doing what it said it would do. According to Juul, the company hasn't sold a single flavored pod to a brick-and-mortar store since November. To preempt possible FDA regulations in mid-November, Juul released its action plan, where it describes steps it would take to keep kids from getting hooked. Juul said it will stop selling its flavored pods to retailers until they implement a system that electronically scans government-issued IDs. But neither Juul nor the FDA is clear on what that system would look like. And Juul tells us that of the 90,000 retail stores that sell Juul pods, 0 have adopted the new scanner. One of the largest vape shops in America, Avail Vapor, told us its warehouse recently ran out of flavored pods, and another store in New York told us that they saved for the flavor winter by buying pods in bulk before the new rules took effect. Other stores told us they are waiting for the FDA to weigh in before adopting any new ID scanning system. Having some of your best-selling products pulled off the shelves may seem like a big setback, but that didn't stop Altria, the multi-billion-dollar tobacco conglomerate behind Marlboro, from paying $12.8 billion for 35% of the company last month.
Let's imagine the combination of Juul's leading market position, brand equity, and deep innovation pipeline with our strong retail presence, our ability to connect directly with adult smokers, and our deep regulatory affairs expertise.
Basically, Juul's handing over a slice of the market that's about to overtake cigarettes in return for Altria's international distribution network and experience battling regulators, which they'll need. The FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb says his agency isn't slowed down by the government shutdown and expects to release the final rules for Juul within a month. The FDA just said that teen vaping represents, quote, an existential threat to the entire product category. Altria seems to think so too.
Youth usage of e-vapor products is a big problem that needs to be resolved, and if it's not resolved, it's going to put the whole category at risk, including for adult cigarette smokers.
Having trouble sleeping? If you're one of the 70 million American adults who are chronically sleep deprived, you have a few options. Some people take pills, some try warm milk, and some listen to really boring podcasts.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and friends beyond the binary. Fuck.
Meet Drew Ackerman.
Check.
AKA Scooter.
Test.
He's been putting the sleepless to sleep for almost 750 podcast episodes.
Are you up all night tossing, turning, mind racing, trouble getting to sleep, trouble staying asleep? Well, welcome. This is Sleep With Me, the podcast that puts you to sleep.
Drew used to have trouble going to sleep and found that listening to boring radio shows helped. So he decided to make his own really boring one.
Sloth socks is one of those things that Sally sells by the seashore. What am I talking about? I don't know what I'm talking about.
This isn't exactly a neurologist-approved treatment, but the idea is that it's a little like the anti-cereal. There's no storyline and there's no exciting characters. Instead, it's more of a rambling jumble of kinda interesting topics, like crocheting or holiday inventory at Trader Joe's. And despite the podcast being rambly and boring, or because it's rambly and boring, he's been able to turn it into a career.
If you can't sleep, there's tons of advice out there. There's drugs out there. Is your podcast kind of a last resort that people come to?
Like I say, oh, it's a podcast to put you to sleep, but it's more like a podcast to be there while you fall asleep.
It's more about companionship, almost, it sounds like.
I'm not a therapist, and I'm not a sleep expert, and I'm not like really a guru. I'm more like a buddy. Like they call on the phone, and you're like, hey, I cannot sleep, or I'm having the worst day. Just tell me some random stuff about your day.
Drew's podcasts are downloaded an average of 3 million times a month. He's hit up to number 4 on the overall iTunes charts, and his massive fan base donates thousands of dollars a month. But for the true fan experience, you gotta go hear Sleep With Me live.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out to see the show.
Drew's now doing live tapings of the podcast for dedicated insomniacs.
Put my pajamas on here.
You can bring your pajamas, your eye mask, and fall asleep to boring topics with other fans of the show.
Everybody reads the paper differently. You know, some people read it with their legs crossed. And this was the time where tighty-whities ruled. Then there's, you know, people that are used to reading it like this. And my mom was a big coupon clipper, so people bought the paper on Sundays also for the coupons.
A lot of podcasters aren't very good live, but Drew is even more boring in person.
How come the only crayon name I can remember is Burnt Sienna? When you're a kid of a certain age and you start to get curious about the human body, she had butterscotch candies, I don't even know. Now's like the trickiest part of the show because this is where I try to bring everybody back slowly.
What is it about the podcast you think that works for you?
He strikes this perfect balance, I feel like, between being just engaging enough, but not so much that you're sitting there like, oh, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next?
What other things have you tried to get yourself to sleep other than this?
I have tinnitus, so sometimes I use like white noise.
You could drink a shot of whiskey.
Sleep medication.
It's music in the background.
Smoke some pot.
Teas and tonics and all that.
Or I could just listen to your scooter and he talks me to sleep.
So I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Everybody give yourselves a round of applause. Newspapers!